Adam, Dr. J, thumbs up if you guys are ready to dive in.
Let's do this.
Again, welcome everybody. My name's Jesse Peters. I'm on board here with the Lucro team. Jumped in a few months ago, and man, it has been amazing to get to know the industry, the work that you all do, and the amazing opportunity that this industry has to actually institute and create life change for so many people. So I just first and foremost want to thank you for the amazing work you're doing on behalf of the amazing doctors and clinics that I've had a chance to meet through the Lucro brand. So just absolutely incredible opportunity. It's not hard to wake up every day passionate about making sure that you all have the resources you need to continue to do this amazing work. So first and foremost, thank you for the work you do. I'm sure you don't get enough thanks for the life change that you're actually able to provide. So that's awesome. So, in that spirit, Lucro is really here to be a resource. We feel like we're fulfilling our mission if we can continue to provide tools and resources and insights to make your job easier. And that's really the spirit with which Lucro was founded and created. So, Dr. J has done some amazing work out of what you might consider a sleepy West Des Moines town with his hard work and ability to focus on the things that matter. He's really had quite a rapid trajectory to one of the fastest growing, if not top one or two single location clinics in the country out of Iowa. I know. You think of Iowa and you think there's nothing but cornfields, and there are a lot of those, but also amongst the cornfields is one of the most amazing clinics in the country. Almost $7 million out of a single location. So when it comes to a wealth of knowledge about the things to focus on and the opportunity you have to optimize your clinic, Dr. J is a wealth of knowledge. And then we got Adam. Wave over there, Adam. Adam is an incredible financial mind. Adam's had the opportunity to scale, grow, sell, and optimize as a financial leader in some amazing companies. So when you bring Adam's financial knowledge and Dr. J's industry knowledge together, boy, you guys have an amazing opportunity to ask some questions to some folks that really know what they're talking about. So I really, really encourage you to participate tonight. Dr. J, if you don't mind, I'm going to tee you up maybe with some marketing questions. Are you ready to roll?
Do it.
Okay, outside of an ad agency, what is the best way to track return on investment? What's the best way to track ROI? Do you have any insight to provide for a clinic owner thinking about it in that way?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, right from the very get go, the biggest thing I talk to doctors, CEOs, owners as any decision or area that you're looking at, first and foremost, you want to look through the financial funnel first, revenue, profit, how much you spend on a marketing team, and then you can always drill into finer level details. So the first metric you want to look at right off the bat, is what percentage of my revenue was devoted to marketing to get the desired outcome, right? So if you spent 10% of your top line revenue on marketing, then you're, overall for your clinic as a whole, you could obviously have monthly recurring revenue, baked in there as well. But that's an easy metric right off the bat. It's like, okay, am I getting an overall 10x ROI on my marketing as a whole, right?
So when you say if I'm getting a 10x back from our marketing, what
Yeah,
do you mean?
exactly. Yeah. I mean, in that scenario, let's say you had 10% in your Lucro report. Let's say you had 10% marketing spend, right? So 100 divided by 10 is 10. And so that's the 10x, ROI on what you spent on marketing versus your total, top line revenue.
Okay, bring it down to earth even more, right? So how would you know that? If you have an ad agency that you're spending for Facebook ads, that means when you get that lead in, you got to track it all the way to the point where they're spending money with you. How would you recommend a clinic owner start thinking about how to follow that dollar through?
Yeah, so that's kind of first step would be just overall, hey, how much did I spend of top line revenue on marketing? That would be, that's always your first filter with your Lucro report. Then you want to drive deeper into next level analysis. Maybe, depending on how many marketing strategies. If you're only doing one marketing strategy, it really makes your life a lot easier running one ad. But most people are obviously running multiple marketing strategies and different subsets of ads within each of those different parts of marketing. So that's where you need to drill down into those different deeper levels. And so that's really going to start to involve your CRM, your EHR, and any type of spreadsheet work. So, the way we do it in our clinic is that we track, in a simple spreadsheet, how much was spent on the marketing strategy, how many leads came in, how many of them scheduled their initial appointment, how many of them scheduled back for a report of findings, how many of them signed up for care, and then what was the dollar amount of the care plan that they signed up for. And so we can track, when you track those along that pathway, then you get all subsidiary next metrics, because oftentimes you're looking at over ROI and you think that might not be a good strategy, but maybe you have a terrible, lead to day one conversion rate, or maybe you have not a good day one to day two show up rate, or maybe you don't have a report of findings, sign up rate problem. So it's, you don't want to just say, hey, this is how much money I spent, this is how many people, signed up for care, because there's lots of other variables all along that gap. Do you have a speed to lead problem? Are you not following up with those leads ASAP within seconds of a lead being submitted? Are they not getting text, emails, and phone calls to transition them from a lead to, a scheduled appointment? And so unfortunately, we don't really have great all-in-one EHR CRM combinations in our profession. So it's hard to get all your data points from a singular source. And so, like I said, that's really where, depending on what EHR you use, you can pull some, obviously revenue data from there, depending on what you use for a CRM, like Go High Level, where your leads are coming in through, or phones. That's why, for me, the best source for us in our clinic is just a very simple spreadsheet, to track those numbers from those different sources, right? From your phones, from your Go High Level, your CRM, from your EHR, from your credit card, or wherever you got that dollar amount spent from your marketing, and combine those into a single source. And so, it may seem like it's a lot of work, and Adam has made a lot of great points is, hey, it's not always easy being a business owner. There's some things that require work, but again, it doesn't have to be you, right? And so that's the big thing I would say. That's great where virtual assistants are extremely important. Just for my, clinic alone, I think we have 7 or 8, virtual assistants, that can compile this data. Allie's a big part. She's on our team, helps compile, a lot of our marketing data. But you can make such better informed decisions along that entire pathway when you can really understand, that first big picture vision, and then drill down. I think the big issue, is that a lot of people drill down into these really, really finite details too quickly. And so there's always 1,000 things you could do, and 50 different things could add up to equal 1%. Or there might be one thing that could move the needle 200%. And so that's really where leverage is so important, in understanding what takes the least amount of my time that's going to have the greatest impact on my business, and being able to utilize your our Lucro software, as well as, EHR and marketing KPIs to help you make, very informed decisions.
Dr. J, if you were going to talk to somebody who, was in their 3rd year running a clinic, what's 1 or 2 takeaways, just a tip next week they could take and ask their agency or consider implementing next week? What would you say?
I would just say exactly what you said, Jesse. Before you even ask your agency a single question, I would highly recommend just that sequencing, like we just talked about, of, lead to booked appointment, show up rates for day 1, show up rates for day 2, conversion rates, stick rates, for each marketing strategy. Because we found oftentimes, hey, this strategy is getting tons and tons of leads, but none of them are signing up. This strategy may be getting very few leads, but 90% of them are signing up. Like we did a health talk at Animal Rescue League recently, and had, way less signups than we were initially anticipating, but almost every single one of them has fully signed up for care. So way less leads, but way higher return. So the quality of the lead, the quality of the conversion, could be very different based on the source that they come from as well. So tracking that, from the front end, dollar amount spent, number of leads, all the way through number of signups and the actual dollar amount signed up for is massively important. It's literally a very simple calculation of, how much did you make divided by how much did you spend, right? That's the overall final ROI. And if you ever heard, to me ever talk about marketing, I talk about, hey, do 100 divided by your profit margin. That's your break even from a marketing ROI. If your profit margin is 40%, 100 divided by 40 is 2.5. Your profit margin is 20%. 100 divided by 20 is 5. So do that math right now. If you've never done that, you got to know. If you don't know your profit margin, then you're not a client of Lucro. I'll say that. But do that math right now. That's your break-even ROI that you need. And so anything above that is profitability. And so, yeah, so you're going to do the exact same thing. How much did you overall make on all the people from that marketing activity? And then how much did you spend? And so the way you want to be able to understand lifetime value is the next level metric. But, that's great. We have an entire masterclass on that. We can get that link posted for how to calculate lifetime value. But even, on the front end of that is just, well, what did they originally commit to for their initial care plan? And that's how we actually track ROI. ROI is just the initial cost of their initial care plan. So when that person does sign up for a care plan, that's what we document as, the ROI of that immediate ROI of that person. So they sign up for a $2,000 care plan. That's what we would put in, as, hey, this person signed up with tied to this marketing strategy, $2,000 or $3,000. Now, some people do pay in full, some people do monthly. We always use the pay in full option. It's just a baseline to make it easy. If you have financing options, they obviously take a percentage, so forth like that. It's not going to be 100% perfect, but it's going to be 90, 95% accurate. To go from 90 to 100% accurate costs 10 times more work. It's just not worth the extra squeeze. So that's how we do it. Hey, this was the cost that was spent. This was the amount of care plan or total care that was originally signed up for. If you really want to get hyper nerdy, you could understand, what's your care plan completion rate, and you could then multiply it even by that. If you want to say, hey, I had 5 people sign up for a $2,000 plan, I know typically, people complete on average, this is our care plan completion ratage, or, overall people complete 80% of their care, then you could even get to a more finite, nerdy number.
Like,
Yeah.
how would you recommend somebody in that early growth phase to really start thinking about either delegating it, handling it yourself,
Yeah.
kind of give some tangible phase 2 steps for somebody starting to think about marketing? Because you can do everything. It's overwhelming to think about
Yeah. Well,
marketing.
first of all, 100 divided by profit margin. First step, you can't do anything else until you know that. What's your baseline minimum marketing ROI? If you don't have that number, we're never going anywhere else, because that is how you gauge the success of every single one of your marketing strategies. If you don't have that fundamental number, then we're never going anywhere else. So you got to have that first and foremost. Is what is the target? What is the minimum ROI you need on marketing so that you can make decisions? Otherwise, it's just going by gut. I think this one's working pretty good. And so that's first and foremost, right? And so then it comes down to, well, where are you at in practice? Do you have time or do you have money? You got more time. If you got more time on your hands than you got money, then you're going to be looking for strategies, that don't cost a lot of money, but you can utilize your additional free time because you're not a super busy clinic. You're trying to grind and put in the effort and energy into getting to the next level, or, you have a team member's time, that you can utilize to help grow your clinic. And so that's where we do tons of community events, all around town, health talks and trainings being, by far the most fruitful ROI strategies that we use that cost very little amount. I know, Jesse, we were talking about just for, our clinic this last weekend, I believe we had 7 different events that we did just this last weekend. And so we booked tons and tons of people, just in a few short days, for a very little overall cost. And so it's going to be very, very easy for us to get super high ROIs on these events because of how low they cost. And so that's really, again, my very first framework, right? And then what you're talking about next, right? I'm talking about tracking a lot of information, virtual assistants. We can go into that. I see some questions starting popping about that. But utilizing, team members and people, if you really view your team members as assets and not liabilities, then the value of a team member is typically way, way more than they cost. And so whether that be a virtual assistant for even lower cost or an in-office person, helping, with marketing, or a marketing person adding to your team, tracking the ROI of those people, especially when you're involved in sales and marketing, very objective measures and ways that you can track and know that that person is bringing in more value, than they're costing.
So, how would you recommend somebody think about structuring maybe compensation? Would it be a blend of salary and commission? How would you
Yeah,
recommend
we had a
somebody
whole
wrapping their head
masterclass. We
around
had a
it?
whole masterclass on compensation. We can get that link posted for that one, where a sales person is typically more of a lower base, higher commission type of model, where they're going to be directly benefited very similarly how you benefit. They're going to be benefited by people showing up and signing up for care in the office, whether that be converting them through a phone call or an in-person event or a text message. They're going to be bonused and rewarded for things that are rewarding for increasing the top line revenue, of your clinic. And so that's exactly how we do it. I'm a big, big proponent, on commission based, very closely tied to revenue. Oftentimes if you put it based on percentages and so forth like that, they can easily, much more easily be kind of twisted in different favors. So having it directly tied to the revenue generated by that team member or by
Hmm.
that activity is the most clear and best way that I've found for you to be on the same page and have aligned goals with that team member.
The first thing I would consider is, how full is your practice? So if you're full, if you're like extremely full and you already got a lot of patients and you can't do a lot, then you're going to default to what Dr. Josiah said is like, hey, well, you don't have a lot of time, so you're probably going to delegate some more. You're going to push things on the side. If you're not very full, then you just roll up your own sleeves, get out there, meet people, shake hands. That's going to be the fastest way that you're going to get full. This notion that you can do a ton of social media marketing, this notion that you can run an ad on Facebook and all of a sudden you're going to have people lined up outside your door, is not the way it works. We are trying to convince people to choose something that in their mind may be a drastic step for their healthcare. They've been pumped with a bunch of mainstream healthcare ideas, and you're saying, no, we've got a better solution. So you're not going to stop someone on a 30-second Facebook post and all of a sudden they're convinced to try chiropractic. It takes a lot longer. There's a lot longer of a cycle there. There's an education cycle. And you want to shorten that cycle, to go speak to them immediately. Don't wait for 45,000 Facebook ads and impressions to get them convinced. Go out there, shake their hand, talk to them, show them what you can do, explain what you can do. And then as you fill up your practice, you're going to have less time. You'll probably delegate more. As you delegate more, you may then default to more social media. That's not incorrect. That's perfectly fine. But if you've got capacity, meaning there's space for, you only get 50, 60% capacity, get out there, go meet people, fill up your practice. The most important thing you can do is fill up your practice. If you don't fill up your practice, you're going to be wasting a lot of money. No matter what you do, you're going to be wasting a lot of money.
And time. I mean, half of the Facebook leads you're going to get are a spam or a bot anyway. So you or somebody you pay is going to spend time trying to sort that out. And then the other half are going to convert at a very low rate once you even do make that contact. And then you're going to have to work twice as hard as somebody you met and had that conversation in person that Adam talked about, into exchanging money for what you do down the road anyway. So yeah, that's a great point. Start
Yeah,
there.
I'm a big proponent for sure on, Jamie, hiring an agency. You shouldn't be running all the ads, figuring all that out. You need to find somebody that is an expert in, running the ads itself, and then obviously finding a in-office marketing person. Obviously, I'm a big proponent of that as well, for doing, the in-person activities, answering the phones, so forth like that. So we have a whole masterclass kind of called Marketing Rhythms for Success. We can get that one posted, as well as just kind of what you do on a regular, consistent basis. But I know you have a successful clinic, so you definitely want to find, the right people that are going to have this as a full-time focus. One of my favorite things about being a chiropractor and being in the chiropractic industry, as an example, is that we have the greatest healthcare product. We get incredible results. Think if you're in an industry where you have an app that always needs to be updated, or you have a toy that you always need to come out with a new one every few months, that you have to constantly be creating a new vehicle or a new something brand new. We don't have that issue. So we can, so much energy and so many other businesses are devoted to R&D. Is a massive time and energy and resources where we already got the product, we deliver amazing care, and you can even do it with your hands. You don't even need anything else, so you can really, really dial in on, okay, how do I get the message out? So you can really, really focus in on the marketing, the operations, those other big pieces that a lot of other industries, they're just trying to get a product that works. We talk a lot about in our clinic about what we call short-term marketing levers and long-term marketing levers, right? So a lot of things you said, are more the long-term. So the short-term, are definitely going to be Google ads, Facebook ads, TV, radio, things that you can immediately get in front of people. Obviously going to cost more, on the front end, but did the capacity calculator, you're paying for a lot more of your schedule opportunity that's not being utilized. So you have this huge opportunity cost of your clinic for all these expenses that are not being fully utilized at capacity. So, that's really where in this situation that you're in currently, you definitely have to look at those more short-term, levers, investments in, most likely ad spend, in those different areas to fill up your short-term capacity while you're simultaneously solving your long-term issue, of your people issue.
One thing I've learned being in this role for 90 plus days at the clinic level is you really got to be really good at activating people at events in person first. And then you can start doing all that other fancy stuff. Team and operations is over the ideal percentage, but marketing and your cost of goods is under. It's probably better to start spending more on marketing and work on the others later, even if profit margin is where it needs to be. I would assume push the marketing to make more sense since your team cost is going to stay about the same.
Yeah, so typically, Adam can speak to this, but typically, if you do the capacity calculator, if your team costs and operations are costs, it's because you have the capacity of much higher revenue than you're actually generating. And so you may think, hey, I have way too high expenses or too high a team. I think that's you could always look at that. But first and foremost, you want to say, why am I not maximizing the cost that I have? So you always want to think, how do I make more money versus how do I save more money? Because the making more money has an unlimited ceiling. Saving more money has a very finite end. And so there's only so much you can save, but you can make unlimited more. So when your team and operations costs are too high, that's a great indicator that you're not maximizing the production of what you're paying for.
Yeah, I would say whenever if you read your report, so I know you read your report, so you look at your report and you go, oh, these things are telling me, in your case, my operations and my team percentage is high. The very first question I would ask is, what is my capacity right now? And once you know that question, then reread the report. Because if you were at 100% capacity, meaning you are seeing as many people as you can see, and your team costs are high and your operations are high, then you're going to have to think about, well, I've got a whole, is my pricing right? Is my operations right? Is my workflow right? Is my efficiency right? Because this team is not generating enough revenue, but everyone's broken. They're all saying they're at capacity. But if your capacity was only at 60%, then you're going to go straight back to what Dr. J said, which is probably what it is. But I was just trying to give you the full circles. Exactly what Dr. J said is like, whoa, hey, you've got to get more patients. You got to feed your team. So then stop worrying about your team costs. Stop worrying about your operation costs. Put your blinkers on. Run down the straight as fast as you can. Get as many new patients as you can. Once that happens, then you can retest, and then you can have a look. Then, okay, now what is it? Is it now a capacity problem? Or is it an efficiency problem? But capacity's got to come first. And I think if anyone takes anything away from this, you're running a business. The business has been around since forever. Okay, I've joked about this before. There was a guy, Jesus was walking down the road. There was a guy on the side of the road selling wine. I can almost guarantee you there was, or he was selling something. That person was running a business. There was no Lucro fancy report. There was no, IFRS or GAAP principles. There was no tax code.
EBITDA.
Other than,
EBITDA.
I don't know, Caesar just demanding his money, whatever it was. But these people were running a business. And what were they doing? Okay, they were just making sure if I had, 10 lots of wine, what are they in, sheepskin or whatever it was, and how much did it cost for me to get it? Am I selling it at more money? Well, it's the same thing for you. You have this whole team, you have the space, you have all of this. Am I maximizing? Am I getting the most out of that or not? And if you answer that question first and then interpret the rest, and that will make it a lot simpler for you.
So holding your team accountable. I know we have master classes about a lot of team, but there's folks that have been with her for a long time. And as time goes on, they've become complacent, especially as it relates to systems, procedures we've put in place. Hey, we wrote it down. How come you're not doing it? Right? I thought when I wrote it down, I was done. So when we try to dial back and hold people accountable, there's this like fight, this tug of war to do it the old ways. So, Dr. J, you want to take a stab at how do you activate your team and get them to actually not be the bottleneck, but the fuel that gets you to grow, especially as it relates to following procedures?
Yeah, I would really say what's in it for them. That's really where you need to always start with, whether it be figuring out someone's, main hot button or complaint or what their life effect is, in the day one and day two, you need to figure out what the hot button and life effects are for your team members. What do they care about? Like, why would it be more valuable for them to follow the SOPs than to not follow the SOPs, right? From a very simplistic standpoint, obviously there's carrots and sticks, and then there's culture, right? And so, carrots and sticks, obviously can be very, very motivating, whether that be having proper objective KPIs, that every team member has. We have an entire masterclass on KPIs in every single position, what I utilize for the KPIs and the performance reviews in our clinic as far as commissions as well as increased in base pay. So we can drop the link for that masterclass as well for that one. So I would really make sure that you have proper alignment of those team members and what KPIs that they're held accountable to, because it shouldn't be you holding them accountable. You should be the KPIs holding them accountable in their performance review. Ideally that's doing the accountability work for you as much as possible. And you're just checking in, and then, the performance review, is doing the work for you and just saying, hey, this is where you're supposed to be. This is where you are. What do you think about that? This is the standard that we have. This is what you did. Can you help me explain why you did that? And so that's really what I found is it's very easy to come down to someone and say, hey, this is what you're supposed to do. This is what you actually did. What's wrong with you? You're stupid. That's my default, so you need to really flip it around and say, hey, this is how we have it mapped out. This is the goal. This is the target. This is what happened. Can you please help me understand? Really having massive curiosity is really one of my favorite words. Is really having that curiosity. Hey, can you help me understand, why this is happening? Can you help me understand? They probably have some really great reason that they think is super valid, and they think it's even better than the SOP, better than the way you think it is. And so you understanding that from their perspective is going to go a long way, first and foremost, and then say, hey, I can totally see why you think, that might be the best answer. Here's the why behind why we have this SOP, here's the why here, and help them understand the why. And so that's been a big thing that we've really worked on Next Level is, you can teach your team, exactly 1 + 1 = 2, but if they don't know why that is the case, then they're only going to fit inside the box of training. Anything outside the box that's a little bit into the gray area, that you may think, oh, that's the exact same, question we have in the SOP, but it's like 1% different. They think it's totally different because it's not documented exactly how you have it documented or how you train them. So again, helping people understand more the why behind what they're doing, is something that we've really worked hard to do. I think, teaching my kids how to think is one of the most important things I can possibly, do as a parent. And I think very similar from a team member's perspective. You can teach them the why, and they understand how, the SOP is created or how you think about a decision. then they're going to be much more likely to make the right decisions more consistently.
Well, I've seen this in, I've visited Josiah's practice, and I've seen this in real life. Every Tuesday they do training, and they close their practice. I'll let Dr. Josiah tell you the details of how long they close for. And they close their practice for a long time, and they do training. And they do training as an entire team. They do things together. They do breakouts. They do a lot of acting out scenarios, role playing. Because if you think about this analogy, in the sports, most people like sports. A football player is going to walk onto the field, and they're going to play for a couple of minutes of a game. By the way, a game of football, the ball is in play for 11 minutes. So the offense is on the field for maybe 15 minutes, and the ball's actually in play for 5 minutes. But they train for hours to optimize that one little point in time. Now, I'm not saying that's how it should be in business, but if you're doing nothing continually on a training cycle, okay, you came in, we trained you for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, got you ready, and then there's nothing else, just go and face the gauntlet. Well, no wonder going to run into some problems, because are you keeping up with people? Are you moving together as a team? And so I would challenge you to really think about, what is your continued training process like? How are you connecting as a team? What are you sharing? What are you talking about? What role plays are you doing? Because that's going to help you not only keep people, going back to the why, what you're doing, but you also, and I'm going to answer a second question here. Dusty, you asked a question around how do you motivate your team? Well, that's also how you motivate your team, because now it's this continual thing, and you're going to pick up in that moment, why is there an inefficiency, or why aren't you hitting capacity? Those are the moments where you're going to start picking that up. But if you're just trying to pinpoint people here or there, it's going to be a lot harder. So I would strongly encourage that mindset of creating those spaces where you're doing that as a team.
Hire for purpose, hire for culture fit, don't hire for performance. In my experience, KPI should be guardrails, not the foundation. If you lean into why you started this profession and a massive team of people that believe what you believe, I think you'll get amazing compliance. But if you make the KPI the point, you're going to find yourself relegated to micromanaging very quickly. Dr. J runs his clinic on EOS, which is a fantastic business structure. If you haven't read Traction by Gino Smith, or is it Gino Wickman? It was Wickman. He's put together what's called the entrepreneurial operating system. And it really provides an objective framework to how to make sure you're focusing on the things that matter. And one of the things he talks about, he makes evaluating team members brutally simple. There's 3 areas you should rank your team members on and have them rank themselves. Do they get it? And that's the culture piece. Do they get what it means to sit in this role? Do they want it? Do they have the passion and the drive to continue to invest themselves at getting better? And that's where that commitment to training that Adam's talking about comes in. Provide them the tools, the resources, the time. Show them you're willing to invest in them. But then they got to also meet you in the middle and show that they want to continue to be the best player on the team. And then the last one is, do they have the capacity to do it? Do you believe, if they understand the role and they want to get better, that they have the true capacity? If not, you, as either the manager or the business owner, have to evaluate if you have a different seat for them, or if there's a place outside of your clinic that they'd be better served to fulfill their purpose. Hire for culture, hire for passion, train for performance, not the other way around. And then, do they get it? Do they want it and have the capacity to do it? What about motivation? How do you motivate a team member to help with efficiencies, recognize those opportunities when they're saying they're at bandwidth and capacity? Like, is there a way to check them at that to show that, if you did something X, Y, or Z different, you might have some additional bandwidth?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit a lot of it, Jesse, with that, with vision, belief, purpose. What's the goal? How are we impacting lives? Sharing testimonials, sharing the impact that you have. in your community, because it's something much bigger than them just answering the phone or entering data, or doing all these tasks that they feel like are just things that they're checking off their list. There's got to be a much bigger purpose, again, the reason why behind what they're doing. And so constantly making sure that your team understands that, they know the bigger mission, they know the bigger vision. When you do have testimonials, people that get amazing results, this needs to be spread and shared with the entire team. In our team huddles, we share testimonials all the time with our positives every single day. And then on a weekly basis, we read all the Google reviews that were written, in the past week. And so just constantly inundating team members, with that positivity, and the impact that they're having, on the people that are coming in through the clinic. I think that's first and foremost, and then, with the capacity calculation, there's something that you're not on the same page with your team members. If they're saying that, you're showing them that they're only at 30% capacity and they're saying they're tapped out, then there's some difference between what you think maybe it should take, let's just say for an adjustment, for example, and you say, hey, an adjustment should take 4 minutes, and they think an adjustment should take 12 minutes, and you're at 33% full. Well, they're taking 3 times as long, so no wonder they think they're at 100% full. So making sure in proper expectations and agreements, with your team members is very, very important, so that they have on the same page. Walk them through the whole calculation, for example, and say, hey, how long does it take for you to do an adjustment? How long does it take for you to do a day 1 in the office? How long does it take to do a report of findings? All right, well, let's calculate, how many hours you're working a week, how many hours you have allocated to do that part of your job, all right, and come up with that exact capacity calculation. If you're off on there might be other secondary duties that maybe they could shed some light on that they're doing, and that's decreasing their capacity that you think they should have for their main priorities. And so oftentimes a lot of urgent things can overtake important things. And so that's where a lot of your team members may be bogged down in these little urgent things or little daily activities, there are all these little death by 1,000 paper cuts. And so that's where they're not able to do the really things important that matter that you're tracking. So a lot of times that's, again, we'll talk about virtual assistants here soon. We could probably transition into that next, Jesse, because that's where I think virtual assistants are so powerful, for a lot of those smaller little one-off tasks, where a lot of people are trying to do these big, important, activities, and then they're jumping into these small, little detail-oriented activities. And it's hard for someone to be efficient and effective at their role when they're bouncing around a lot, or, juggling so many different balls. So that's where I would say virtual assistants, would be a great role in helping take off those little things off of your team members' plate, so that they really can focus on the top revenue generating activities, in your clinic as best as possible. And so the company I work for, I utilize with our virtual assistant, is called Bruntwork. I'll post a contact information for that here in a second. And so we've had a great experience with hiring virtual assistants through them. You're obviously in any role, do your, slow to hire, quick to fire, right? So, making sure you're taking your time, what are the exact qualifications anytime you have a role. The way we really like to do it is we like to build out a performance review before we ever hire anybody. So I think the performance review should even be done before you build the job description, because the performance review writes the job description. So building that performance review first and foremost, I think, is the best place to start. You already have your core values. They need to be aligned in that, to even, be the right person. And then how do they understand if they're in the right seat? What are the objective measurements that you can measure this person on, KPIs, ideally, or, what is their primary purpose or skills that they need to be successful, and what are all the different activities that person is going to be held responsible or accountable for. And so mapping those out first and foremost is going to really help you ideally find the right person. And then, as far as training them, again, that's where we're big on training, closing down Tuesdays from 9 a.m. to 4 a.m. for training, having documented SOPs, doing, whether it be documented videos, documents, or involving your other team members that are already doing those tasks very, very well, involving them in the training out as well as what we call the test out process as well. They need to prove efficiency, actually test out and get it signed off by another team member that this person that they're signing off that this person can do, the job as needed. So communicate with your team members on the front end and figure out why there's that misalignment with the capacity, and then, like I said, drawing up a performance review, I think would be your next steps.
I think we might have an opportunity to live into that core value a little bit better. Would you agree or disagree? Oh, no, I would disagree. I think I'm so busy. Now you can transition into the data and the numbers and help them evaluate, but use the core value as your entry into whether or not they are or are not living up to that standard, not the number. The KPI is the guardrail. They can be an incredible self-vetting mechanism for your team. So if efficiency is something you care about and you want a team of people to recognize opportunities to always be efficient, make sure that's a core value you hold dear when you hire and fire against if they're not living up to that standard.
Awesome.
All
Then we had
right.
another follow-up question from Mallory of just examples of tasks you've assigned
Oh
to
yeah.
your virtual assistants. Yeah, phones, is a big one. We have, like I said, we don't have any phones at the front desk. We have actually 2 virtual assistants just for phones, one for current practice members and then one for incoming new patients. So we have 2 full-time phones virtual assistants. And again, speed to lead is your number one indicator to convert a lead into a booked appointment, is how fast you follow up with them. So that's vitally important to have somebody on that. A lot of marketing agencies also have team members. Our marketing agency that we use in our clinic, Lead Juice, for our clinic, they also have people that call on the phone too, but they say only within 5 minutes. And I'm like, I want it within 30 seconds, but 5 minutes is better than an hour, that's better than 99% of most places that they're calling within 5 minutes. And so that's a big one right off the bat. But then think about what all your team members are doing at a computer, and you're going to find that there's actually a lot more things than you realize are potential opportunities for them. A lot of the data entry, the stat tracking, all of that, of course, can be done as a virtual assistant. Anytime someone fills out paperwork in our office, that has to then be entered into our EHR, right? So all of our paperwork, our team members simply just scan in every single day. And then while we're sleeping, all of our virtual assistants actually data entry all of the paperwork into our EHR, all of their information, everything they filled out in the paperwork is then transferred from paper to digital by our virtual assistants while we sleep. Emails, texting, anything, like I said, just anything that can be done on a computer. Lots of things you can just Google, virtual assistants, activities that they can do, but you'd be surprised, and I was pretty similar. Like when I first started, I was like, oh yeah, this, and this, but we've really expanded and hired more and more virtual assistants. Like I said, I think we have 7 or 8 virtual assistants just for our clinic now.
Huge shout out to Lead Juice, by the way, as a marketing director for the clinic. They took the calories also of booking all of our Facebook leads. So they handle all of the intake for leads that they generate. I'll put Mike Stanzik's name in there and their agency. Huge shout out to his team. They have given me a lot of my time back.
All right, looks like someone asked about virtual assistants working on the weekend. The only ones we have on the weekend is the new patient phones person, and they are doing 2 to 3 hours on the weekend, just for any leads that come in as they come in on the weekend. That's the only thing that we have for consistent weekend work. And like I said, it's just as they come in. If there's 1 lead over the weekend, that's all they do. If there's 10 leads over the weekend, that's all they do. So that's how we'd handle that.
Like follow-up sequences for new patients / leads. How many calls should they be getting? What's your follow-up text sequence? Do you have any insight or tips to provide on how often or what those sequences should look like for converting that lead maybe that didn't book on the first attempt?
Yeah, I would say that's something we can even get better on. I'm sure Jesse would agree, but biggest thing, like I said, is just the speed. is the big thing. I think you could have lots and lots of follow-ups, but if they're not being done fast, then again, that's kind of like a secondary metric. So I would really, really focus on the speed first and foremost. As soon as a lead, comes in digitally, are they getting a text? Are they getting an email with links? And then are they getting a call within seconds? That's first and foremost. That's, number one. The next most important thing is like number 100. Then, we do what we call a double dial with our calls, where we're calling them right away, and then we call them again, immediately or multiple times within the first day. Typically, we're trying to call them at least 3 times their very first day that a new lead comes in, and then 2 to 3 times the second day. So you're getting them 5 to 6, phone calls plus multiple texts and emails right off the bat. Like I said, it's all about speed of lead. Once they're then over, 2 days old, the chance of that person converting is, goes from 1,000% to 20%. So that's really the biggest thing, is that you really want to focus on first and foremost. With our industry, we are a very quick turnover and sell. People are reaching out to us because they have a complaint, they saw an ad, it's not a slow sales cycle. There's lots of other industries that have much slower sales cycles, where it might take, a month for you to make a decision, or 6 months, to convert a lead into someone that's, a regular client. For us, it's typically very fast. If they are in pain, if they have a complaint, if you don't answer, they're literally just going to the next number, on Google. So it's very, very important that you really have that frame of mind. And this is also something going into hiring marketing team members that me and Jesse talk a lot about, is that you need to find team members that understand that quick sales cycle. They need to understand that they only may have 30 seconds to 5 minutes at the most to connect with a lead, and they have to get them scheduled, to come into your office. And if they don't do that within 5 minutes, then they most likely are never going to have another opportunity again. Whereas lots of, sales roles are these slow relationship building, roles, where they're bringing a gift basket, and then they're having a coffee, and then they're, sending a proposal, and then they're going back and forth. Like, that's not our sales cycle. So really having that understanding of the quick turnaround, that you need to have, is very, very important, first and foremost.
Gartner did a really interesting survey 3 years ago, and it was all based on the general consumers' buying habits. And buried within this survey was a really fascinating question. So this is a survey they did 3 years ago. They asked a question: if you could, would you prefer a seller-free buying experience? Said another way, if you could buy something without having to talk to somebody, would you prefer that? So out of thousands of people that they asked that question to 3 years ago, the answer was 33%. 33% of the people 3 years ago said, yep, if I could, I'd rather not have to talk to somebody when ordering a pizza or scheduling an adjustment. They did that same exact survey with the same demographics, with the same list of questions last year. That number increased from 33% to 75% in less than 3 years. So if you really want to start converting leads, find a way for people to self-book themselves on your website. Even better, set up automated text sequences with a link in them to make it really easy for them to click a link. So whether it's an acuity or high-level automated sequences, find a way, because the general public doesn't want to have to call you, and figure out a way to find a day and a time that works for your staff. Kind of transitioning from ops into finance, we got a couple left here. So any recommendations for PV per week versus how many team members you should or could have, whether that's CAs and associates? Like, what are some numbers there that these owners should be focused on?
Yeah, I personally, I don't like tracking it that way, Jamie. It's a great question, but I would not track it that way. Like I said, that's really where you want to get more into the capacity understanding. You really want to understand, like I said, your style of care, your type of adjustments, your type of visits, how long are those taking, how long efficient is your team, the flow. You want to get much more granular and individualistic for your own versus a very broad, number. A better evaluation instead of, patient visit per week, a good metric that we like to talk about just from an overall holistic viewpoint is more revenue per employee. So just dividing, your top line revenue divided by how many employees you have. You'd really like that number to be around $250,000 of revenue per employee. So you're making $1 million, you have 4 team members. And I do include yourself in that one as well. And so $250,000 per employee is kind of a good fundamental top of the funnel metric. And then it's like, okay, I did my calculation. I'm $100,000 per employee. Okay, there's definitely some capacity optimization that needs to be done. And so, like I said, a lot of the bigger things like that are very good for kind of top, easy, quick evaluations. But ideally, you want to make more of your decisions off a little bit more finite, individualistic answers. So I would say much more based off the capacity calculator is by far and away how I would do that with understanding your capacity. That's going to help you understand, hey, my adjustments are almost at capacity when I need another doctor. My day ones are almost at capacity. My day twos are almost at capacity. Whatever those different bottlenecks are, all your different appointment types, then that's where I would make those decisions off of.
I would echo what Dr. Josiah said. I think a number that I always float around in my head is if you predominantly adjustment based, you're looking at like 175 adjustments per chiropractor, and you probably want like each chiropractor has an assistant kind of vibe, but that's such a broad stroke that you could get dangerous to just apply that as perfect science. I think there's a lot of little pieces that need to go into it. And I think what Dr. Josiah said is fundamentally important, is tracking what you want. What does that look like for you? What does your treatments look like? So I would just say what I said is kind of a really big picture. And then are you within those bands, and then work from there.
Bring us home, Dr. J. Talk about the why and where Lucro potentially fits. Not in like a overly sales way, but why did you start this thing?
Yeah, no, I mean, I appreciate that, Jesse. The biggest thing that I talk about all the time, if you've ever heard me talk, you probably heard me compare Jesus and chiropractors, and I just think we have the greatest opportunity in the healthcare profession. We're at the most opportune time, probably in the history of the world, of how we're being positioned and, everything that's going on in the nation, to be at the forefront of leading the charge of natural healthcare, with your body in mind, of your body being the true source of intelligence, and everybody understanding about vaccines and seed oils and big pharma and all these types of things. So, how can you position yourself to be the beneficiary of what's all going on in the world right now, and position yourself to deliver that greatest healthcare product, that there is, the impact that we could have on people's lives. We've all heard the testimonials. I mean, it blows all of us away. It blows me away every single day when we hear about the impact that we can have on people's lives. And so for me, that's why I'm so excited about Lucro and the opportunity that we have, to help everybody understand how to run a more efficient business. And, in accounting, Warren Buffett says accounting is the language of business. And so unfortunately, we didn't go or learn any of that in chiropractic school. And so we learn how to be great doctors, we learn how to deliver fantastic care, but we need to learn the language of business, which is accounting, and that needs to be the first and foremost filter that you make all your decisions through. And so it really should direct your initial decision so that you know where the gold is buried, where you need to focus for your clinic to get it to the next level, to impact more lives, and to have a bigger impact, not just on your family, but everybody's family, in your town and in your area. So that's the big vision, that we want to have in Lucro, we want to be a part of. We now have over $500 million of annual clinic revenue inside the Lucro software. And so our goal by the end of this year, my goal is to get over $1 billion, $1 billion of annual chiropractic clinic revenue inside of our software that we can have incredible insights of what's working, what's not working, what are the top clinics in the entire country and eventually the entire world doing that others aren't, and what are the bottlenecks and plateaus that clinics are running into along that path to grow and scale and make a bigger impact, and how can we help you avoid those plateaus and bottlenecks so that you can continue to have, you know, an upward trajectory of growth, you know, to have that impact.
We will recap this with takeaways. Any resources that were talked about, links that were shared, you're going to get delivered to you in a wrap-up email along with a video of this masterclass. So thanks for your growth mindset. Thanks for delivering life-changing care. And thanks for making us a part of your journey. We really appreciate all you do. Be encouraged. Make it a great week, and thanks for joining.